So
I think we might be ready to ring revenge on. Is that it?
No. Let's talk a little bit about LEC first, just because
cool,
I think we have to. People are going to watch this and want to hear our takes about like the draw and everything like that, and how we.
One thing I will say is, if you're the people in Vitality, you know what, Monte? There's only been 1 second this split that I actually wanted Vitality to not make the playoffs. Because look at that team on paper. Of course, you want those names in the play. It was the moment when they lost that second game, Monte. And despite the fact the week began with the teams that had a chance to mathematically eliminate the playoffs having to win all 3 games, while Vitality would have had to go 0-3, including losing to Astralis. So when they actually went 0-2 and made it possible, I actually became an Astralis fan in that moment, guys. I wanted Astralis to put these...
And then Astralis got mega-bodied.
For real, I wanted motherfuckers like Selfmade, even my mates like Pug said, you shouldn't be in the playoffs if you're even putting yourself in that situation. Like, unless you go on to win this split... This is already a whack-ass split. Look how many fucking... You already ended 9-9 or whatever. Like, what the fuck is this? You have a super team. Did you see there was that interview where Showmaker himself even said, when he saw like the off-season roster for Vitality, he was like, holy shit, this is incredible or whatever. And then he saw the games. He was like, what the fuck? Like if you're Vitality, this is... Like, here's the thing. If you're the XLs of the world, yeah, you're supposed to creep in the playoffs. By the way, spoiler, Misfits was supposed to be in that camp. Like, if you're Vitality and you have that roster, like, this ain't funny that you just crept in a play. That's actually just whack, dude. Like, you think you're going to win Worlds with a team playing like that? You're not going to fucking win anything with a team playing like that. I'd be surprised if they win the first playoff series at this point in time, mate. That's a joke. They limped into the playoffs.
They did. What I will say is that certainly in the do or die situation, at the point of elimination, Perks especially, Perks and Alfari certainly rose to the occasion.
Oh, of course, yeah.
We can have an argument whether rising to the occasion against the literal last place team in the league.
Yeah, I would have liked that to have been like a real squad, so it could have been a real sweat, when
Astralis is literally in last place, and that's, you have a dominant performance, that's what you should expect from a team like Vitality. And they came off like a pretty disappointing loss, I would say, against G2 the previous day, where Broken Blade's Tryndamere kind of just styled all over and just 1v1'd Alfari multiple times. And it was, it's not how you want to make it in the playoffs if you're Vitality. But the other side of that is, do you really want to bet against Perks when his back is against the wall? And as silly as it sounds, considering the overall performance, like very mediocre performance of the team, he certainly showed the fuck up in that game, and that's just what he's capable of in do or die scenarios. So I think they're still scary. I also think that they have 2 weeks to work out their shit. And one of the things that is great about the LEC playoffs is that we have this 2-week break for the teams to really like scrim hard, get in shape. And we've talked about this before, but it can be very difficult to fix problems on teams in the middle of a split, because you have 5 days before your next game. And if there's a deeply embedded problem within your comms or, kind of within your champion pools, it can be really, really difficult to dig yourself out of that in a 5-day period. But once you have a couple weeks, it becomes a lot easier to reset and identify and solve deep-seated core issues within a team. So that's certainly something. Vitality could fix some of these problems and then come out in a much better state once we see the playoffs start.
Basically, I'll give people an abstract concept that's related to what you were talking about, which goes like this. If you imagine the average week for an LEC team like you're describing, let's say, remember, they always play on Fridays in LEC.
They take Sundays off.
So let's say you have, assuming you have a day off each week, so let's say you have 4 days worth of practice each week, right? You know what a fan say those naive things they always say, Monte. So in League of Legends, they go, wow, how can he be a professional mid laner and not play Orianna? Or in CSGO, they go, but how can they not be good on Overpass? Just practice the map, bro. It's like, in what time? I'm practicing to win this next game. So what happens is this, guys, every time you're in the middle of a season, you have to do triage. You have to go, right, what would actually be a valuable use of my time? First of all, what am I good at so I can keep good at that? And then let's work on a couple of things that maybe are like borderline that I'm just trying to tweak a little bit. That's all you're doing week to week. Whereas if you wanted to actually, like the fan says, is like fundamentally work on something, like something you're really bad at. Like let's say like it's a couple of years ago and you had Arome as your top laner. If you want to work on him being a carry top laner, I can't waste half a day of that if I'm not going to use him as a character. Like essentially I have to have time off to do that, boys. Like I have to really build into that. Similarly, if we want to work with new champions we haven't worked with, comps we've never been able to run, that's going to take like a solid week to get that fucking online and going and on. It's the reason why if people do actually during a split get a whole system up and running like in the middle, I always think those are the people who should win the fucking Coach of the Split awards, mate. Like those people did fucking work miracles. They did it all and implemented what they were trying to do, so fair play.
Yeah, I think there are other advantages too. And actually, I looked at the date here, and Vitality doesn't even play until the 27th. They're playing the last game. So they have 20 days from today. So they actually have 3 weeks from their last game in order.
Yeah, because people don't know, they still do that really weird thing in LEC, right? Where like the upper bracket plays first, even though like you'd think logically it'd be like the like you're saying the 5th and 6th place match, but they make like the upper play before them.
That's really weird.
Fucking, I know it's weird, isn't it? But whatever. It's one of those like what? Okay,
that's definitely weird.
Like the bonus, you're in the upper bracket, you play first. Should I get a break? I'm in the upper bracket. Like what?
So I mean, it would only move them forward to the 25th, right? So it'll only be a couple days movement. But even so, the other advantage that people probably won't consider for Vitality is Vitality is just going to get better practice than the teams in the upper bracket because they're going to be able to practice against all 4 teams in the upper bracket because they're not
4 teams to play. Yeah, exactly.
Because they're not going to play one of the. You're not going to play. They'll play one of those teams if they beat Excel in the next round. But it's a lot less dangerous for those teams to practice against Vitality than it is for them to practice against the team that might face them in the upper bracket semifinal. So Vitality weirdly, yeah, they have one less life because they start basically without double elimination. They have single elimination and they have to play 5 best of 5s to win this instead of 3. But they start with a lot of time to fix issues with players that we already know are clutch or strong, and they start with a pretty significant advantage when it comes to practice partners, you would think. So it's not unreasonable to think that they could make a deep run. Obviously, we'd have to see some.
It could, but not the team I was watching in those games or that last week. That team wouldn't win fucking anything. I was seeing the Groy beat Astralis. That's it. That's it. What? Just whacking it. Because there's the other thing as well, right? Here's the problem. I notice, right? Because of perks, we're all in our brain putting the perk sheen onto Vitality. Like, remember, beyond perks, no one else here is a fucking champion. What if the rest of them? I mean, Kazi technically is a champion, but debatable how much of that is on him. Like, the problem is, they are acting, in tone, Monte, they're acting like they were G2 the last few years. But it's like, mate, the reason why G2 could fuck around and win every split is look at the roster they had. They're like the best players and some of the most experienced, and they'd all won everything. Like, this lineup, like, is just living on the dream it's going to turn around. It's not possible, like you say. There's still time, and the roster, in theory, is good enough. But the stuff you saw in the split, that won't get it done. That won't win the LEC, mate. This team has no consistency whatsoever, this squad.
Yeah, I also think, like, when you look at the teams that are supposed to be the favorites, a lot of people are really high on Fnatic right now because of their last few weeks of competition as opposed to Rogue. But Fnatic also did lose that game kind of in a silly fashion to Misfits this last week. And you could also point at Rogue and say, okay, well, they lost to SK. But SK has actually been much better in the second round robin.
Nicked a lot of wins of people, yeah.
Yeah, they've been, I think, 5-4 in the second round robin, and they started 2-7. So basically, they got themselves into a hole that they really couldn't dig their way out of. But they've had some solid wins against good teams over the last few weeks. And I think, in spite of that loss, one of the things that stood out to me from Rogue's games this week was that Malrong was playing much more like a normal jungler than, crazy gank style, be random places on the map. And it seemed like they had a more stable, performance as a result. Because sometimes when, as we've seen with Rogue, if things go wrong for Malrong in the jungle in the early game, like they go really wrong for the entire game. Whereas it didn't feel like it was the case this week. And I think they played a really smart game. I mean, what they were doing against G2 in that game at the level 1 invade was like really well done by Trimby and Malrong, and the call that they made, anticipating the invade and then basically being able to just snowball that and the leads they got through mid lane into a win in that game. So I think if anything, despite the loss to SK, I was more encouraged by what I saw from Rogue this week because it seemed less punishable in a best of 5, because that was always the question, right? Like we discussed this on the show previously, but it's hard to prep for a team like Rogue or a team like Malrong or a player like Malrong that was playing this wacky style when you have to prep for multiple opponents in a week. Whereas if you have weeks to prepare, for a best of 5, you have like 3 weeks right now to prepare for a best of 5 versus Rogue, you might be able to come up with things that would disrupt their early games or shut Malrong down, which then shuts down basically the entirety of Rogue. Because if he doesn't get advantages doing what he's doing, it becomes very hard for them to win. But we saw, I would say, less risky play this last week, and I think it's going to be harder to get a read on Rogue in the playoffs overall. So I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk for Fnatic by any means, even though they look improved. I saw some positive developments from Rogue as well.
I also think people have tunneled a little bit too much on the Malrong angle. Like, yeah, listen, he was definitely a massive attenuating factor in how hard they won or how early they could get ahead in the game, etc. But I actually think the angle that's been overlooked because of the whole Malrong, it's a different Rogue angle, is it's actually Trimby, mate. That guy is low key, especially by the end of the split. He's just smurfing half these games. And look at his champion pool. Look at the roams. This guy's really come into his own this last split. It makes you wonder, what the effect of playing with Hans Sama was, or maybe he didn't have a good chemistry with Inspired or something, because he looks like a totally different player in this Rogue. And that's the factor to me. It's look, even if Malrong isn't going to be as dominant as he was earlier in the split, look at the other players they have, though. Everyone knows exactly how they're going to play in the game. There's no, competing, what resources, no, they know exactly where it's at. In the team fights, mid and AD are going to fucking do work and just do clean fights. You know what Odo's going to do. I think it's the spectre of past Rogues that's bringing everyone down Monte and making them feel like they should just bail on them before the play. Look, they might not be the best team, I can't say that, but I think they're going to be strong in the playoffs. I think actually this is the time they get it done, mate.
Yeah, I think it says a lot to Trimby, because last year when we were talking about, well, here's another Rogue disappointment, and do you make a roster change even though they're so good in the regular season and they're so dominant? Who's the player that you change out? Why did they even get rid of Vander for Trimby in the first place, right? Yeah. These were questions. Trimby is probably the player you get rid of if you have to get rid of anybody on this roster. Instead, they lose their arguably two best players from last year, and they come back and still do the same thing over again. I think what you have to consider is that Trimby may just be a player that has higher synergy with Malrong making aggressive plays than a support player whose job is to provide vision or pressure for Inspired to path and farm in the enemy jungle. That's totally reasonable. That could be the case, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd also say as well, it's funny that obviously Labrov was the one who had the bigger name and is, even to this day gets all the attention in Vitality. Is he good? Is he not? But this just shows that the Vitality squad of a couple of years ago actually did do good pickups. Comp Labrov, I can see why they went for that bot lane. Those two were clear talents coming out of VRLs. And now you've actually gotten to see this split, what Comp can actually do. When he's in a quality team, the joke is this is exactly what you'd order from ADC. He just checks all the boxes. Just a fucking really good ADC player, really clean player. Seems like he knows exactly how to do his damage. Plays the meta champions. What more could you want? Looks mega.
I mean, I'm a bit wary about Rogue because I feel like the Rogue is the ultimate razor cake from the last few years in League of Legends.
Of course.
Because every time I see Rogue, it's the first iteration of Rogue. Oh man, that looked like a delicious cake. Was full of playoff razors, and then they trick me. They oh, we're gonna change our entire style. So at first it was a lovely I don't know, cheesecake, and it was full of razors. And now it's this chocolatey Black Forest cake. I'm this is an entirely different cake. Surely it can't have razors in it as well, right? And now it's just a new kind of cake. And I'm sitting here asking myself if it has razors in it or not. But it's tempting me again. I have to say, it's very tempting.
I know something that'll mildly tilt you, Monty. For something like 15 or 20 years, I never ever used to eat cheesecake. Can you guess why?
You hate cheese?
I don't like cheese, and I thought it tasted like cheese, so I never ate it.
But it doesn't taste like cheese at all.
No,
it's cream cheese.
I didn't know that. That's the point, mate. No one told me it's cream cheese, and they just said cheesecake. I was that sounds disgusting. No thanks. And then someone years later, actually 20 plus years later, was they just they put a flavour into it, though, and you won't be able to taste cheese. I was oh, Fair play. See why you
I'm
eat that
glad you
shit
enjoy
now.
cheesecake now.
Whatever. Just let you know. I enjoy Rogue now and I enjoy cheesecake now. Thing is, I will say, if somehow there are raisins in this cake, I promise, guys, this time is the last time. 'Cause I have a real problem with that in general, mate. I have a problem with that in general, you know.
Thorin, you get baited by their regular season win percentage every time.
The problem is just like, if a pattern makes sense, it should work. So I always tell Richard, like the esports industry stuff where I'm just constantly like, but Richard, they don't even have rules that they apply. I'm just like Charlie Brown just kicking the football every time, mate. Like, but surely this time, Frosco can't move it. Oh, bloody hell, should move that in. Yeah, it's just me getting wrecked every time, innit? Just believing it. But they have to hold to the rules, Richard. Surely the rules, there are no rules. We all know that. Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.